The black Mercedes Maybach glided through the exclusive gates of Westchester County Airport like a shadow, cutting through silk. Behind tinted windows worth more than most people's annual salary, tech mogul Marcus Blackstone adjusted his platinum Patek Philippe watch, a $2.8 million masterpiece that didn't just tell time, it announced dominance. At 52, Marcus commanded respect in every boardroom from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. His company, Quantum Energy Solutions, had revolutionized renewable technology, making him not just wealthy, but untouchable. Silver threads wove through his dark hair like precious metal, and his steel-gray eyes held the cold calculation of a man who had never met an obstacle he couldn't buy, manipulate, or destroy. Beside him, 28-year-old Sophia Chen was everything his wife wasn't: spontaneous, adoring, and blissfully uncomplicated. Her emerald silk dress clung to her perfect figure, a $15,000 creation that he'd bought her just that morning. Her laugh tinkled like expensive crystal as she gazed at the sleek silhouette of his private jet waiting on the tarmac. "I still can't believe this is real," she breathed, her accent carrying just a hint of her Hong Kong upbringing. "A whole week in the Seychelles, just us." Marcus placed his hand on her thigh, feeling the silk warm beneath his palm. "Get used to luxury, darling. This is just the beginning of our new life together." The Gulfstream G700, his $78 million pride and joy, sat gleaming under the afternoon sun like a metallic predator. Its registration, N1QES, was visible on the fuselage, a not-so-subtle nod to his company's stock symbol. This aircraft was more than transportation. It was a flying monument to his success, complete with a master bedroom, full kitchen, and conference room that had hosted deals worth billions. As the Maybach stopped at the aircraft stairs, Marcus felt the familiar rush of absolute power. His pilot, James, had been with him for 15 years. His flight attendant, Maria, knew exactly how he liked his Macallan 25 served. Every detail of his world was orchestrated to perfection, controlled by his will and his wallet. "Sir," James approached with military precision, "we're cleared for immediate departure. Flight time to Mahe is approximately 14 hours. Marcus nodded curtly, his hand guiding Sophia up the aircraft stairs. The interior was his personal sanctuary: cream Italian leather, polished walnut, and technology that could run a small country. The moment they settled into the forward cabin's club seating, Maria appeared with champagne already poured. "Dom Perignon 2008, she announced with practiced elegance. "Shall I prepare the usual dinner service, Mr. Blackstone?" "Perfect," Marcus replied, accepting the crystal flute. He was in his element, surrounded by luxury, attended by loyal staff with a beautiful woman gazing at him with undisguised worship. Sophia's eyes sparkled as she took in the opulent surroundings. "This is incredible, Marcus. It's like a flying palace." He raised his glass, the champagne catching the soft cabin lighting. "To New Horizons, beautiful. To us." They clinked glasses as the engines spooled up, their distinctive whine building to a powerful roar. The jet began its taxi to the runway, and Marcus leaned back, feeling the familiar thrill of departure. Everything was perfect. His secret was safe. His wife, Catherine, believed he was in Dubai closing a renewable energy deal with the Emirates. The lie had rolled off his tongue so easily it almost felt like truth. Catherine, for a moment, guilt pricked at his consciousness like a splinter. She was 8 months pregnant with their first child, a son they'd already named Alexander. She'd been excited about the baby, glowing with maternal joy, but pregnancy had made her cautious, careful, predictable. She questioned his longer hours, his frequent business trips, his growing distance. Sophia was the antithesis of all that. She was fire to Catherine's water, chaos to her order. When he'd met Sophia at a tech conference in Singapore 6 months ago, she'd been a mid-level marketing executive with dreams bigger than her paycheck. Now she was his escape from the suffocating responsibility of impending fatherhood and a marriage that had become more partnership than passion. The jet accelerated down the runway, pressing them back into their seats. Marcus felt the aircraft lift off, carrying them away from consequences and into a week of paradise. Below, the lights of New York spread out like scattered diamonds, beautiful and distant. "Tell me about the resort," Sophia said, curling up against his arm like a satisfied cat. "The Four Seasons private island," he replied, his voice smooth with satisfaction. "We have the presidential villa, private beach, infinity pool, personal butler. I've reserved the entire spa for you one afternoon." Her eyes widened. "The whole spa? Just for me?" "Nothing's too good for you, darling. You deserve to be treated like a queen." It was exactly what she wanted to hear, and he knew it. Sophia wasn't complex. She wanted luxury, attention, and the thrill of being with a powerful man. Unlike Catherine, who challenged him, questioned him, pushed him to be better, Sophia simply reflected back his own magnificence. As they reached cruising altitude, Marcus allowed himself to relax completely. The deal he was supposedly closing in Dubai would actually be finalized remotely while he was on the island. His assistant would handle the details. His CFO would manage the board presentation. The beautiful efficiency of delegation meant he could have his cake and eat it too. "You know what I love most about you?" Sophia murmured, tracing circles on his chest with her finger. "Tell me." "You take what you want. You don't apologize for success. You don't let anyone hold you back." Her words fed his ego like oxygen to a flame. This was how the world should see him, not as a husband with responsibilities, but as a conqueror taking his rightful spoils. The cabin grew quiet except for the steady hum of the engines. Maria had dimmed the lights and retreated to give them privacy. Sophia had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her breathing soft and even. Marcus stared out the window at the star-filled void beyond, feeling like a king surveying his domain. He thought about the prenup Catherine had insisted on before their marriage, how prescient she'd been, how she'd protected her family's old money from any potential claims. At the time, he'd been mildly insulted. Now he was grateful. It would make the eventual divorce cleaner, easier. He'd give her a generous settlement, shared custody of Alexander, and they'd both move on to new chapters. In his mind, it was all already decided. Catherine would understand eventually. She was pragmatic, intelligent. She'd see that they'd grown apart, that he needed someone who matched his energy and ambition, someone like Sophia. The flight attendant call button chimed softly, interrupting his thoughts. Strange, he hadn't pressed it, and Sophia was still asleep. He looked around the cabin, confused. "Mr. Blackstone," came Maria's voice over the intercom, but there was something different in her tone, less deferential, more formal. "Yes? We're beginning our descent into Mahé. Local time is 6:47 a.m. However, there's been a slight change to your arrival arrangements." Marcus frowned. "What kind of change?" A pause. Then, perhaps it would be better if Mrs. Blackstone explained. The blood in his veins turned to ice water. Mrs. Blackstone. Catherine. From the aft section of the cabin, a figure emerged from the shadows like a ghost materializing from his worst nightmare. Catherine moved with the careful grace of late pregnancy, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. She was dressed in a simple cream cashmere dress that emphasized her condition. Her auburn hair pulled back in an elegant chignon that highlighted her angular face and intelligent green eyes. Eyes that were now fixed on him with the patient, predatory focus of a lioness who had been waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of old money and older rage. "I hope you don't mind the surprise. I thought it was time we had a conversation about the future of our family." The champagne turned to acid in his stomach. His perfect world, his carefully constructed lie, his flying sanctuary. All of it crumbled in an instant. He was trapped at 40,000 feet with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and no excuses left to tell. The most powerful man in renewable energy had just discovered that his wife had been playing a game he didn't even know had begun, and judging by the cold satisfaction in her eyes, he was about to lose everything. Sophia jolted awake at the sound of the unfamiliar voice, her eyes wide with confusion and growing terror. She pressed herself against Marcus's side like a cornered animal, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his arm. The emerald dress that had seemed so elegant moments before now appeared garish and inappropriate under Catherine's steady gaze. How did you? Marcus stammered, his usual commanding presence evaporating like morning mist. His mind raced, through possibilities each more impossible than the last. The flight manifest, the crew, the security protocols, everything was under his control. This couldn't be happening. Catherine moved with deliberate slowness to the club seating across from them, lowering herself carefully into the cream leather chair. Her movements were graceful despite her advanced pregnancy, radiating the kind of quiet authority that came from generations of old money and elite education. "You seem surprised, darling," she said, the endearment dripping with ice. "I suppose you thought your little arrangement was foolproof. A secret flight to paradise with your associate." Her eyes flicked to Sophia with clinical disinterest, as if cataloging an insignificant insect. Maria appeared from the galley, carrying a crystal glass of sparkling water with lime. "Your usual, Mrs. Blackstone," she said, her voice warm and deferential, completely different from her interactions with Marcus. "Thank you, Maria. You've been wonderfully discreet." Catherine accepted the glass with a gracious smile, then returned her attention to her husband. "I imagine you're wondering how I managed to board your precious aircraft without your knowledge." Marcus found his voice, though it came out strained and foreign. "The crew, they would have told me. The manifest—" "Oh, they did tell someone," Catherine interrupted smoothly. "They told the actual owner of this aircraft. You see, Marcus, when we restructured our assets 3 years ago for tax purposes, I insisted on being added as co-owner to all major holdings, including N1QES. She gestured elegantly to their surroundings. "Technically, I have as much right to be here as you do." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. He remembered the asset restructuring, pages upon pages of legal documents his attorneys had assured him were routine. He'd barely glanced at them, trusting Catherine's sharp financial mind to handle the details while he focused on the bigger picture. His own complacency had become her weapon. "But the flight plan," he protested weakly. "We're going to the Seychelles." "Are we?" Catherine's eyebrow arched with aristocratic disdain. "James, could you please clarify our destination?" The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, professional but noticeably cold toward Marcus. "Mrs. Blackstone, we're currently on approach to Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. Estimated landing time is 47 minutes. The cabin seemed to tilt, though the aircraft flew steady and level. Marcus felt his world reshaping itself around him, familiar landmarks becoming foreign territory. "You can't do this. I have meetings, commitments." "With Sebastian Hartwell?" Catherine's voice carried a note of amused satisfaction. "The renewable energy consortium deal you were supposedly closing in the Seychelles?" "Yes, I'm aware of that fiction too." She reached into her designer handbag, a Hermes Birkin that had cost more than most people's cars, and withdrew a slim tablet. "I took the liberty of calling Sebastian yesterday. Lovely man. We discussed his concerns about doing business with executives who lack moral flexibility." Marcus's blood ran cold. Sebastian Hartwell was notoriously conservative, a family man who had built his renewable energy empire on principles of integrity and trust. The kind of man who would view an extramarital affair as a character flaw that could impact business judgment. "You told him about," Marcus began, but Catherine held up a perfectly manicured hand. "I told him nothing. I didn't need to. I simply mentioned that you were taking a personal vacation to the Seychelles during what he considered crucial negotiation time. He drew his own conclusions about your priorities." Sophia finally found her voice, shrill with panic. "You can't just kidnap us. This is illegal." For the first time since her appearance, Catherine looked directly at the younger woman. The gaze was not angry or jealous. It was clinically detached, the way a scientist might observe bacteria under a microscope. "Miss Chen," she said, her voice carrying the subtle authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You work for Meridian Marketing, correct? Junior account executive, Specializing in tech sector campaigns? Sophia's face paled further. How do you... Your employment contract includes a morality clause regarding relationships with clients or their executives. Standard industry practice. Catherine's tone remained conversational, almost friendly. I wonder what your supervisor would think about your client relations methodology. The younger woman's breath came in short, panicked gasps. Her entire career, her visa status, her carefully constructed new life, all of it hung in the balance. Marcus watched his mistress crumble and felt his own foundation shifting beneath him. Catherine, this is between us. Leave her out of it. Is it? Catherine's green eyes flashed with the first hint of real emotion. Because from where I sit, Miss Chen is very much part of our family's business. She's been enjoying the fruits of our shared success. The restaurants, the jewelry, the designer clothes, all purchased with assets we built together. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. Did you think I wouldn't notice, Marcus? The credit card charges, the unexplained absences, the sudden need for business trips that never appeared on your calendar. Marcus's mind raced through the past 6 months, trying to remember how careful he'd been, what mistakes he might have made. He'd used discretionary accounts, paid cash, when possible, covered his tracks with the skill of a man who'd built an empire on strategic thinking. I've been watching you for 4 months, Catherine continued, reading his thoughts with unsettling accuracy. Every restaurant reservation, every hotel charge, every lie you told me while I carried your son. Her hand moved protectively over her belly. I know about the apartment in Tribeca you rented for her. I know about the jewelry from Tiffany. I know about the weekend in the Hamptons when you told me you were visiting your mother. Each revelation was a precise surgical cut, dismantling his careful deceptions with ruthless efficiency. The apartment. How had she discovered the apartment? He'd used a shell company, paid the lease through a series of legal proxies. My family didn't build our fortune by being naive about human nature, Marcus. We've been dealing with unfaithful husbands, greedy business partners, and ambitious social climbers for over a century. Did you really think your little MBA tricks would fool me? The contempt in her voice was devastating, more painful than anger would have been. She wasn't hurt, she was disappointed, the way a teacher might be disappointed in a student who'd cheated on an exam after showing such promise. Marcus felt something inside him crack. Catherine, please, we can work this out. The baby is exactly why we're having this conversation at 40,000 feet, she interrupted, her voice regaining its icy control. Alexander deserves better than a father who thinks he can have everything without consequences. She touched her tablet screen, and Marcus heard his own voice filling the cabin. It was a recording of a phone conversation, his words intimate and damning as he made plans with Sophia for their island getaway. Audio surveillance is remarkably easy when you have access to someone's devices, Catherine observed, watching his face drain of color, especially when that someone trusts you enough to share their passwords. The recording continued, his voice describing in explicit detail what he planned to do with Sophia once they reached the private villa. In the background of the recording, he could hear himself moving around their Greenwich mansion, probably getting dressed for another business dinner. Sophia made a strangled sound and buried her face in her hands. The romantic fantasy she'd been living was revealed as sordid reality, her powerful lover exposed as simply another cheating husband with more money than morals. Turn it off, Marcus whispered. Why? Aren't you proud of your eloquence? Catherine's finger hovered over the tablet. I particularly enjoyed the part where you described me as boring and past my prime. Your son will find that fascinating when he's old enough to understand. The threat hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. She was documenting everything, building a case that would destroy not just his marriage, but his relationship with his unborn child. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely audible. Catherine smiled, the first genuine expression of emotion she'd shown since appearing. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a predator who had finally cornered her prey after a long, patient hunt. What I want, Marcus, is to ensure that my son inherits a legacy worth having, and that means making sure his father understands the difference between power and consequence. The jet began its descent toward Teterboro, the engine's pitch changing as they lost altitude. Outside the windows, the familiar coastline of New Jersey came into view, and Marcus realized that his journey to paradise had become a flight straight into purgatory. The descent felt like a metaphor made manifest. Marcus's world literally falling back to earth as Catherine systematically dismantled everything he thought he controlled. The Gulf Stream's interior, once his sanctuary of power, had become a gilded prison with his pregnant wife as both judge and executioner. I imagine you're curious about the extent of my preparations, Catherine said, her voice maintaining that terrifying calm as she scrolled through her tablet. Let me walk you through your new reality, darling. She touched the screen and Marcus's phone began buzzing incessantly. Email notifications, text messages, missed calls, a digital avalanche that made his stomach clench with dread. At precisely 9:47 this morning, the Quantum Energy Solutions Board of Directors received an emergency notification about irregularities in executive expense accounts, specifically charges that appeared to be personal in nature, funded through company discretionary budgets. Marcus lunged for his phone, but Catherine's voice stopped him cold. I wouldn't answer that if I were you. Jonathan Walsh has been trying to reach you for the past hour. Something about a forensic audit and the need for immediate clarification regarding your recent expenditures. Jonathan Walsh, the board chairman, a man who'd known Marcus since his startup days but whose loyalty was ultimately to the shareholders, the kind of man who would sacrifice his own mother if fiduciary duty demanded it. You can't prove anything, Marcus said, though even he could hear the weakness in his own voice. Can't I? Catherine's smile was razor sharp. Shell companies are remarkably easy to trace when you know where to look. The apartment lease for Miss Chen, paid through Blackstone Consulting LLC, the jewelry charged to strategic initiatives, fund, the restaurant bills, the hotel stays, even this little vacation, all funded through accounts that are supposed to support company operations. She turned the tablet toward him, showing a spreadsheet that made his blood run cold. Every transaction, every cover story, every careful manipulation, all laid out in precise, damning detail. Corporate embezzlement carries serious penalties, Marcus. Not just financial, but criminal. Prison time. Sophia whimpered beside him, the sound of a woman realizing she'd attached herself to a sinking ship. Her dreams of luxury and power were evaporating as quickly as Marcus's authority. How did you? Marcus began, but Catherine cut him off with a dismissive wave. My family has been managing complex financial portfolios for generations, darling. Did you think your little accounting tricks would fool me? I helped structure half of these accounts when we were building the company together. The reminder of their partnership, how she'd been there from the beginning, contributing not just her family's capital but her own brilliant mind, was like salt in an open wound. He remembered late nights when they'd worked side by side, her insights sharpening, his vision, her connections opening doors that would have remained forever closed to a middle-class kid from Ohio. The board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m., Catherine continued, her tone businesslike. Emergency session to address the audit findings and discuss interim leadership arrangements. You can't remove me from my own company, Marcus protested, though even as he said it, he knew how hollow it sounded. Your company? Catherine's laugh was like breaking glass. Quantum Energy Solutions exist because my family's trust fund provided the initial capital. Your brilliant technology exists because our shared patents were developed in laboratories I helped finance. The government contracts exist because of relationships I helped cultivate through connections built over generations. She leaned forward, her green eyes blazing with an intensity that reminded him of why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. Before success had made him complacent, before power had made him arrogant. You became so enamored with your own mythology, Marcus. The visionary tech genius, the self-made billionaire, the master of the universe. You forgot that empires are built by partnerships, not personalities. Maria's voice came over the intercom, interrupting the brutal assessment. Mrs. Blackstone, we're beginning final approach, landing in approximately 15 minutes. Thank you, Maria, Catherine replied, then turned her attention back to Marcus. I should mention, the crew has been incredibly cooperative. 15 years of loyalty can be remarkably flexible when it's properly appreciated and compensated. Marcus looked at his hands, seeing them shake for the first time in decades. His pilot, his flight attendant, even his own wife. They'd all been planning this moment while he'd been lost in his own delusions of invincibility. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Catherine consulted her tablet with the efficiency of a general reviewing battle plans. In approximately 3 hours, you'll be meeting with Arthur Krantz from Krantz, Williams & Associates. They're the best crisis management firm in the city. Discreet, effective, and expensive. They'll help you navigate the board inquiry and the inevitable media attention. Arthur Krantz, Marcus knew the name. A fixer for the ultra-wealthy, the kind of man who made scandals disappear and reputations magically rehabilitate themselves. Also, incidentally, an old friend of Catherine's family. They'll recommend full cooperation with the audit, immediate restitution for any questionable expenses, and a voluntary leave of absence while the investigation proceeds. If you're smart, and despite recent evidence to the contrary, I still believe you can be smart, you'll take their advice. And if I don't? Catherine's expression didn't change, but something cold and implacable settled in her eyes. Then the audio recordings I mentioned become public. The financial documentation gets shared with federal authorities. Miss Chen's visa status gets reviewed for potential immigration violations. She glanced at Sophia, who had been silent throughout the exchange, paralyzed by the magnitude of her situation. I'm sure ICE would be very interested in a foreign national who's been living beyond her declared means, possibly through undisclosed relationships with American citizens. Sophia made a choking sound, her face going ashen. Her entire life in America, her career, her apartment, her carefully constructed new identity, all of it hung by a thread that Catherine could cut with a single phone call. You're destroying everything, Marcus said. But there was no fight left in his voice. I'm protecting everything, Catherine corrected him. Our son's inheritance, the company's reputation, the legacy we built together before you decided it wasn't enough. The jet touched down with barely a bump, the smoothest landing Marcus could remember. Outside the windows, he could see black SUVs waiting on the tarmac, not his usual security detail, but unfamiliar vehicles with tinted windows. Legal counsel, Catherine explained, following his gaze. Also representatives from the board, and I believe Detective Morrison from the Financial Crimes Unit wants a word about proper expense reporting procedures. Marcus felt the last of his strength drain away. Detective Morrison was notorious in business circles, a bulldog investigator who specialized in white-collar crime and had never met a corporate executive he couldn't humble. Catherine, please, he said, his voice cracking. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can work together like we used to. Think about Alexander, about our family. For the first time since appearing, Catherine's composure wavered. Her hand moved protectively over her swollen belly, and Marcus saw a flicker of the woman he'd married. Brilliant, passionate, deeply moral. I am thinking about Alexander, she said softly. I'm thinking about what kind of man I want him to become. I'm thinking about whether I want him to learn that power means you can hurt the people who love you, or whether I want him to understand that true strength comes from keeping your word and honoring your commitments. The cabin door opened with its familiar hydraulic hiss, but this time the sound felt final, irreversible. Cool New Jersey air flooded the cabin, carrying with it the scent of jet fuel and impending consequences. Marcus looked at the woman across from him, his wife, his former partner, the mother of his unborn child, and saw not an enemy but a mirror reflecting back every choice he'd made, every principle he'd abandoned, every bridge he'd burned in his relentless pursuit of more. I loved you, he whispered. Catherine's smile was infinitely sad. I know you did, Marcus. That's what makes this so tragic. You had everything, love, partnership, success, respect, and you traded it all for the illusion of having even more. The legal team was boarding now. Serious, Men and women in expensive suits carrying briefcases full of documents and consequences. Behind them, Marcus could see Detective Morrison's familiar bulk filling the aircraft doorway. His empire wasn't just crumbling. It was being systematically dismantled by the one person who understood exactly how it had been built and where all the weak points were hidden. As the investigators filled his once private sanctuary, Marcus realized that Catherine hadn't just outplayed him. She had shown him a mirror he'd been avoiding for years, and the reflection was more terrifying than any criminal charge or financial ruin. He had become a man he no longer recognized, and the cost of that transformation was everything he'd ever truly valued. The Teterboro Airport hangar felt like a courtroom designed by someone with a twisted sense of irony. Marcus's own Gulfstream served as the backdrop for his professional execution, while the woman he'd betrayed orchestrated his downfall with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Detective Morrison filled the cabin doorway like an avenging angel, in a rumpled suit, his weathered face showing the kind of satisfaction that came from finally cornering a big fish. Behind him, Arthur Krantz moved with the fluid grace of a man who charged $2,000 an hour to clean up messes exactly like this one. Mr. Blackstone. Detective Morrison's voice carried the flat authority of someone who'd seen every variation of corporate arrogance and found them all equally tiresome. I think we need to have a conversation about creative accounting practices. Marcus looked desperately at Catherine, searching for any sign of mercy in her composed features. She was studying her manicured nails with the detached interest of someone watching a mildly entertaining television program. Detective Morrison, Arthur Krantz interjected smoothly, his silver hair and bespoke suit projecting exactly the kind of expensive competence that made scandals disappear. Perhaps we could handle this more diplomatically. Oh, we're well past diplomacy, Catherine said, speaking for the first time since the authorities had boarded. Mr. Krantz, I believe Detective Morrison has some questions about expense account. Irregularities that total approximately $2.3 million over the past 6 months. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd never added it up, never seen the cumulative damage spelled out so starkly. Individual transactions had seemed manageable, justifiable, business entertaining, client relations, corporate hospitality. Collectively, they painted a picture of systematic embezzlement. Sophia had been silent throughout the boarding process, pressed into her seat like she was trying to become invisible. Her emerald dress, so alluring hours ago, now looked like a costume in a play that had gone horribly wrong. When Detective Morrison's gaze fell on her, she made a small whimpering sound. Miss Chen, the detective said, consulting a tablet that looked remarkably similar to Catherine's. Interesting immigration history. Student visa, then H-1B work authorization, currently in process for permanent residency. I imagine maintaining that status requires demonstrating legitimate income sources. I have a job, Sophia stammered, her accent more pronounced under stress. I work for Meridian Marketing. Annual salary of $67,000, Detective Morrison read from his tablet. Yet you've been living in a $12,000 per month apartment in Tribeca, wearing jewelry that costs more than most people's cars, and taking vacations that would strain a Fortune 500 executive's budget. The immigration court tends to frown on lifestyle inconsistencies. Arthur Krantz stepped forward, his crisis management instincts kicking in. Detective, surely we can resolve this without involving immigration authorities. Miss Chen appears to be a victim of circumstances rather than a willing participant in any alleged misconduct. Alleged? Catherine's voice cut through the diplomatic doublespeak like a laser. She produced her tablet and pressed play. Marcus's own voice filled the cabin, recorded just weeks earlier during a phone call he'd thought was private. Don't worry about the money, baby. It's not like they audit every expense. What's the point of having corporate accounts if you can't use them to take care of the people you love? The recording continued, Marcus's voice casual and dismissive as he explained how easy it was to disguise personal expenses as business costs, how the board never looked closely at discretionary spending, how Catherine was too busy playing house to pay attention to the financial details. Sophia's face crumpled as she heard herself giggle in the background of the recording, her voice bright with mercenary delight. You're so bad, Marcus. But I love how you take care of me. That's conspiracy to commit fraud, Detective Morrison observed with professional satisfaction. Both of you, knowingly participating in the misappropriation of corporate funds. Marcus watched his life disintegrate in real time. The recording was devastating not just for its legal implications, but for what it revealed about the man he'd become. Casual in his criminality, contemptuous of his wife, arrogant in his assumption that consequences were for other people. "Catherine," he said, his voice breaking, "how long have you been recording me?" "Since I found the first credit card statement," she replied matter-of-factly. 4 months of conversations, Marcus. 4 months of you planning your betrayals, celebrating your cleverness, and discussing me like I was an inconvenient piece of furniture. She stood carefully, her pregnancy making the movement deliberate and graceful. "Detective Morrison, you'll find complete financial documentation in the briefcase Maria is preparing. Every transaction, every forged approval, every creative interpretation of corporate policy." Arthur Krantz was scribbling notes furiously, his legal mind already working on damage control strategies. "Mrs. Blackstone, while I admire your thoroughness, I hope you understand that this evidence could be challenged on privacy grounds." Catherine's smile was arctic. "One-party consent state, Mr. Krantz. Perfectly legal to record conversations when you're a participant. And as co-owner of all the devices Marcus used, I had every right to access their contents." She moved toward the cabin door, pausing beside Marcus's seat. For a moment, her mask of control slipped, and he saw the pain underneath, the deep, abiding hurt of a woman who'd been betrayed by the person she'd trusted most. "You want to know the truly tragic part?" she whispered. Her voice meant only for him. "If you'd just asked for a divorce, I would have given you one. Quietly, generously, with shared custody and a settlement that would have kept you comfortable. For life. All you had to do was be honest." "I was afraid," Marcus began, but she cut him off. "You were afraid of looking like a failure. Afraid of admitting you weren't the master of the universe you pretended to be. So instead of facing one difficult conversation, you chose to become a criminal." Detective Morrison was cuffing Sophia, her tears streaking her carefully applied makeup as the reality of her situation finally sank in. Federal charges, immigration violations, potential deportation, the price of her luxury lifestyle was going to be devastating. "Marcus Blackstone," Detective Morrison said, turning toward the man who'd once commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will. "You're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." The familiar words washed over Marcus like a tide of unreality. This couldn't be happening. He was Marcus Blackstone, the genius behind quantum energy solutions, the man who'd revolutionized renewable technology, the billionaire who'd built an empire from nothing, except it hadn't been from nothing. It had been built with Catherine's family money, Catherine's connections, Catherine's brilliant financial mind working alongside his technical vision. And now Catherine was methodically destroying everything he'd tried to steal from their partnership. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the cabin window. The man staring back at him was a stranger, hollow-eyed, defeated, stripped of the arrogance that had defined him for so long. "The board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Catherine said, her voice now addressing Arthur Krantz. "I assume interim leadership arrangements will be discussed." "Mrs. Blackstone," Krantz replied carefully, "I should mention that your own position on the board might be complicated by these proceedings." Catherine's laugh was genuinely amused. "Mr. Krantz, my position on the board is secured by family trusts that predate my marriage to Marcus. My shares, my voting rights, and my fiduciary responsibilities are completely independent of his criminal activities. In fact, I'd argue that exposing this fraud demonstrates exactly the kind of oversight the shareholders deserve." As they led him toward the cabin door, Marcus turned back one last time. Catherine was sitting in his former seat, her hand resting on her pregnant belly, scrolling through her tablet with the calm efficiency of someone managing a complex but routine business transaction. "Catherine," he called out desperately, "what about Alexander? What about our son?" She looked up, and for just a moment, Her expression softened with genuine sadness. Alexander will grow up knowing that his mother stood up for what was right. Even when it was difficult, he'll learn that actions have consequences, that integrity matters more than comfort, and that true strength comes from facing your mistakes rather than hiding from them. The hangar air hit Marcus like a slap as they escorted him toward the waiting police cars. Behind him, his empire was crumbling. His marriage was over, and his future had narrowed to the confines of a federal courthouse. But the most crushing realization wasn't the legal consequences or the financial ruin. It was understanding that he'd had everything a man could want, and he'd thrown it all away for the hollow thrill of thinking he could have even more. The woman he'd underestimated, dismissed as boring and past her prime, had just demonstrated a mastery of strategy that made his corporate maneuvering look like child's play. She hadn't just caught him in his betrayal. She'd used it to save everything he'd been prepared to destroy. As the police car pulled away from the hangar, Marcus caught a final glimpse of the Gulf Stream through the rear window. Catherine was visible in the lit cabin, already on the phone with what was undoubtedly the first of many calls to rebuild what he'd tried to tear down. She wasn't just the mother of his child, or the wife he'd betrayed. She was a master strategist who'd been playing chess while he was playing checkers, and she'd just delivered checkmate with the ruthless precision of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. 6 months later, Catherine Blackstone stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on the 47th floor of the Chrysler Building, watching Manhattan wake up beneath a blanket of fresh snow. The city sprawled endlessly in all directions, a testament to ambition, dreams, and the eternal human hunger for more. In her arms, 3-month-old Alexander gurgled contentedly, his tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb with the unshakable grip of someone who'd never known a world without absolute security. He had his father's steel-gray eyes but his mother's determined chin, a combination that suggested he'd inherited the best of both parents' strength. "Mrs. Blackstone," her assistant's voice came through the office intercom, respectfully quiet, in deference to the sleeping baby. "The Wall Street Journal reporter is here for your interview." Catherine smiled, adjusting Alexander's position against her shoulder. The interview had been scheduled for months, the first major media appearance since she'd taken over as permanent CEO of Quantum Energy Solutions. The business press had been fascinated by the story. The pregnant wife who'd exposed her billionaire husband's fraud, saved the company, and emerged as one of the most powerful women in renewable energy. "Send her in, please." Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus's former mistress despite the shared surname, entered with the confident bearing of a journalist who'd made her career exposing the secrets of the powerful. She was young, ambitious, and sharp enough to have earned the respect of subjects who usually treated reporters as necessary annoyances. "Mrs. Blackstone, thank you for agreeing to this interview. I know your time is precious." Catherine gestured to the sitting area adjacent to her desk, a comfortable arrangement of leather chairs that had been designed for exactly these kinds of conversations. "Please, call me Catherine. And don't worry about Alexander. He sleeps through everything. A useful skill for the son of a CEO." As they settled into their chairs, Sarah activated her recording device with practiced efficiency. "I have to ask the obvious question first. 6 months ago, you were known primarily as Marcus Blackstone's wife. Today, you're running a company worth $12 billion. How did that transformation happen?" Catherine's laugh was warm but edged with steel. "I think that question reveals a common misconception. I was never just Marcus's wife. I was his partner in building quantum energy from the ground up. My family's trust provided the initial capital, my connections opened crucial doors, and my financial expertise helped structure the deals that made us a major player in renewable energy." She shifted Alexander to her other arm, the movement unconscious and natural. "What changed wasn't my capabilities. It was the board's recognition that those capabilities needed to be properly utilized. The fraud investigation that led to your husband's arrest, some critics have suggested it was orchestrated revenge rather than genuine corporate oversight." The question was pointed, exactly the kind of challenge Catherine had expected. Sarah Chen hadn't built her reputation by lobbing softball questions at powerful subjects. "Let me be very clear. Catherine replied, her voice carrying the authority that had commanded boardrooms for the past 6 months. Marcus embezzled over $2 million in corporate funds to finance an extramarital affair. That wasn't a personal betrayal, I discovered. It was a fiduciary breach I was legally obligated to report. She leaned forward slightly, her green eyes intense. As a board member and major shareholder, I had a duty to every investor, every employee, and every pension fund that trusted us with their money. Personal feelings don't override legal responsibilities. But the timing, confronting him on the private jet, recording conversations, the coordinated media exposure, it suggests a level of planning that goes beyond simple corporate oversight. Catherine's smile was enigmatic. Effective leadership requires strategic thinking, Sarah. When I discovered the fraud, I had to consider not just the immediate legal requirements, but the long-term implications for the company's reputation and stability. She gestured toward the windows, where the Manhattan skyline stretched endlessly. Quantum Energy Solutions employs over 15,000 people directly and supports hundreds of thousands of jobs through our supply chain and partners. A scandal handled poorly could have destroyed all of that. A scandal handled strategically could actually strengthen the company by demonstrating our commitment to integrity. And your husband's current situation? Catherine's expression grew more serious, though she maintained her professional composure. Marcus is serving his sentence at a minimum security federal facility. 18 months for fraud and embezzlement, plus restitution and community service. His legal team negotiated a plea agreement that avoided more serious charges. Do you have any contact with him? Limited. He has visitation rights with Alexander, supervised and scheduled through our attorneys. Whatever personal issues existed between Marcus and myself, I won't let them impact my son's relationship with his father. Alexander stirred in her arms, making small, contented sounds. Catherine instinctively adjusted his position, the gesture revealing the deep maternal protectiveness that had motivated many of her decisions. The company has thrived under your leadership, Sarah observed. Stock price up 37%, 3 major new contracts with federal agencies, and the breakthrough in solid-state battery technology. How much of that success do you attribute to the removal of distracting influences? It was a diplomatic way of asking whether Marcus had been holding the company back, and Catherine appreciated the tact. Marcus was brilliant at the visionary aspects of leadership, seeing possibilities others missed, pushing boundaries, inspiring people to believe in transformative change. But building sustainable success requires different skills: attention to detail, long-term strategic planning, and the ability to balance innovation with operational excellence. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I think what we're seeing now is what happens when those complementary skill sets are properly integrated rather than working at cross purposes. There are rumors about a potential IPO for the battery technology division. Can you comment on that? Catherine's smile was non-committal but knowing. We're always evaluating opportunities to maximize shareholder value and accelerate the deployment of clean energy technologies. I can't discuss specific transactions, but I will say that the solid-state battery breakthrough opens up possibilities we're very excited about. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, covering everything from Catherine's management philosophy to her thoughts on work-life balance as a new mother running a major corporation. Throughout it all, she projected exactly the image she'd carefully crafted: brilliant but approachable, tough but maternal, successful but grounded in deeper values. As Sarah packed up her recording equipment, she asked one final question. Any advice for other women who might find themselves in similar situations, discovering that their partners or colleagues aren't who they appeared to be? Catherine considered the question seriously, bouncing Alexander gently as he began to fuss. Trust your instincts, she said finally. When something feels wrong, investigate. When you discover wrongdoing, act. And remember that you're never as powerless as people, including yourself, might assume. She stood, moving to the windows again. Most importantly,